If you close your eyes and conjure an image of Leo Tolstoy, the picture is almost always the same. You see the patriarch, the quintessential Russian sage, a figure carved from granite, sporting a waist-length gray beard, bushy eyebrows that seem to weigh a ton, and a coarse peasant blouse. He stands as the immovable object of world literature, the titan who penned War and Peace, and Anna Karenina. We are taught to revere him as the grandfather of the novel, a safe, dusty icon resting on a library shelf, but history has a way of smoothing over the sharp edges of a man's soul until only the polished statue remains. We forget that statues are cold and hollow. The real Leo Tolstoy was neither safe nor polished. If we chip away the marble of the great writer, we find something far more volatile. We find a man who was a spiritual anarchist, a man who, were he alive today, would likely be on a government watch list. This is the story of a man who declared war on his own legacy, a count who despised his title, a wealthy landowner who hated money, and a Christian who was excommunicated by the church. To understand him, we must begin not with his birth, but with his spiritual death. It begins in the 1870s. Tolstoy is at the absolute peak of his powers. He is rich, famous, and happily married. He has everything a man could dream of. But inside, a terrible darkness is growing. He calls it the arrest of life. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was a sudden, violent realization that life was meaningless. He would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, paralyzed by a simple question. Why? Why write another book? Why buy another estate? Why raise children if we all just die in the end? He wrote later. I felt that what I had been standing on had crumbled, and that I had nothing left under my feet. The feeling was so intense that he had to hide ropes from himself to avoid the temptation of hanging himself from the rafters of his study. He stopped carrying a shotgun while hunting, afraid he might turn the barrel on himself. Ideally, he should be happy. In reality, he was staring into the abyss. And so, to save his own life, he killed the writer. In 1871, he wrote a letter to his friend, the poet Afanasy Fet. In it, he delivered a sentence that still shocks literature lovers today. How happy I am that I will never again write such verbose rubbish like war. Rubbish. Verbose garbage. He looked at War and Peace, the novel the world considered a masterpiece, and saw only a distraction. Decades later, in 1908, when a visitor praised his novels, Tolstoy replied with a devastating comparison. That is like someone coming to Thomas Edison and saying, I greatly respect you for being a good mazurka dancer. I attach importance to my other books entirely. He believed that art that did not teach moral truth was a sin. He pivoted. He learned Greek and Hebrew. He sat down to rewrite the Gospels. He was no longer an artist. He was a prophet seeking salvation. What did he find in his search? He found a Jesus that the church didn't recognize. Tolstoy stripped Christianity of everything supernatural. He took a red pen to the Bible. No virgin birth, no walking on water, no resurrection. To Tolstoy, these were fairy tales invented by priests to control the ignorant masses. He focused on one thing only, the Sermon on the Mount, specifically the command, do not resist an evil person. He took this literally, absolutely literally. No police, no armies, no courts, no jails. He argued that if you are a Christian, you cannot serve in the army because the army's job is to kill. You cannot serve on a jury because the court's job is to punish. You cannot swear an oath to the Tsar because your only king is God. This was not just theology. In Imperial Russia, where the Tsar was the head of the church, this was treason. The reaction was inevitable. On February 24th, 1901, the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church struck back. They published an official decree. It was read in cathedrals across the vast empire. It declared that Count Leo Tolstoy was a false teacher, an enemy of the Lord, and was cut off from the faithful. It was an excommunication. To the average Russian peasant, this was terrifying. Their beloved writer was now a heretic. Priests preached sermons calling him the Antichrist. They were forbidden from praying for his soul, but the church miscalculated. Instead of destroying him, they made him a martyr. On the day the news broke, crowds gathered in Moscow not to burn his books, but to cheer for him. He had become bigger than the church. You might think this is ancient history, but Tolstoy's ideas are so sharp, they can still cut today. Fast forward a century to modern Russia. In 2009, in the Rostov region, a court case was filed. The charge? Extremism. The defendant? A man who had been dead for 99 years. Legal experts analyzed a pamphlet Tolstoy wrote called The Spirit of Christian Teaching. They concluded that because Tolstoy called the church a sorcery and a harmful lie, his words incited religious hatred. On September 11, 2009, judge officially ruled that the words of Leo Tolstoy were extremist materials. Think about that. The man who inspired Martin Luther King Jr., the man who preached absolute nonviolence, is classified in his own homeland alongside terrorists. That is the power of his truth. It is still dangerous. But Tolstoy's greatest battle was not with the priests, it was with the executioners. Following the failed revolution of 1905, the Russian government unleashed a wave of terror. The Prime Minister, Pyotr Stolypin, set up field courts-martial. These were justice assembly lines. A trial lasted 24 hours. There were no lawyers. There was no appeal. The verdict was almost always death. The hangman's noose became so common The people gave it a dark nickname, Stolypin's necktie. Tolstoy sat in Yasnaya Polyana, reading the newspapers. Every morning, a list of names, peasants, students, workers, hanged, hanged, hanged. He could not eat. He could not sleep. He felt that his silence made him an accomplice. So, in 1908, he wrote the article that would shake the empire. I cannot be silent. It was an open letter addressed directly to the rulers of Russia. He didn't use polite titles. He stripped them naked before the world. Listen to what he wrote to the Tsar and his prime minister. I appeal to all of you, to you, the two main hidden executioners, who through your complicity participate in all these crimes, Pyotr Stolypin and Nicholas Romanov. He called the emperor an executioner. Come to your senses, he screamed from the page. Think again. Remember who you are. For before you were executioners, prime ministers, czars, you were first and foremost men. He warned them. Today you have seen the light of day. Tomorrow you will be gone. The article was banned immediately. Editors who printed it were arrested. But it didn't matter. Copies were typed by hand, passed in secret from village to village. Tolstoy had become the conscience of the nation. While Russia was drowning in blood, Tolstoy looked for hope elsewhere. He looked to the East. He believed that truth was universal. He studied the Vedas of India, the teachings of Confucius, the Tao Te Ching. And in this global search, he found a student. In South Africa, young Indian lawyer was struggling against the British Empire. He read Tolstoy's letter urging non-resistance. The lawyer's name was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi wrote to the old count, I studied Tolstoy's works assiduously, Gandhi later said. His books made a deep impression on me. I came to understand the limitless potential of love. They exchanged letters until Tolstoy's death, the old Russian sage and the future father of India, when Gandhi eventually led the Salt March, when he brought down an empire without firing a shot. He was walking in the footsteps of Leo Tolstoy. But Padashuranam, there is a tragic irony to this story. The man who could teach the world how to love could not find peace in his own home. Tolstoy preached poverty. He wanted to give everything away, his land, his money, his copyrights. He wanted to live like a peasant. But his wife, Sophia, was not a prophet. She was a mother. She had borne him 13 children. She had managed the estate for decades. She had hand-copied War and Peace 7 times. And now, her husband wanted to leave their children penniless to Sophia. This wasn't holiness. It was insanity. It was cruelty. She fought him like a lioness protecting her cubs. She screamed. She threatened suicide. She begged. The atmosphere at Yasnaya Polyana became toxic. The home of the great humanist was a battlefield. They weaponized their diaries. Tolstoy would write about how his wife didn't understand him, knowing she would read it. Sophia would write about how cruel and vain he was, knowing history would read it. Tolstoy felt like a prisoner in his own house. He was served by servants in white gloves while writing about equality. He ate off silver plates while preaching simplicity. He called his life a monstrous lie. By 1910, at the age of 82, he could take it no more. Sophia had begun spying on him, searching his papers at night. He needed to escape. He needed to die, not as a count, but as a man. The night of October 28th, 1910. Pitch darkness. The old man wakes up to the sound of footsteps. It is Sophia. Searching through his desk, he lies frozen, heart hammering against his ribs. When she leaves, he makes his decision. He wakes his doctor. "We must go," he whispers. "We must go now." At 5 a.m., stumbling in the dark, the most famous man in Russia flees his estate. He heads for the stables. He is running away to dissolve into the vastness of Russia, to find a quiet corner where he can live his truth. He buys a third-class train ticket. He sits among the peasants, unnoticed in the smoke and noise. For a few hours, he is free. But the 20th century has no secrets. A passenger recognizes the beard. The whisper spreads. It's him. It's Tolstoy. The escape was short-lived. The cold draft of the train was too much for his 82-year-old lungs. He began to shiver. A fever set in. The train made an emergency stop at a tiny, obscure station called Ostapovo. The station master, a kind man named Ivan Oselin, gave up his bed for the dying writer. And suddenly, that little house became the center of the world. Reporters swarmed the station. Pate News set up cameras. The Tsar sent secret police. The world held its breath. And Sophia, poor Sophia, arrived in a special train car. She was desperate to see him, to say goodbye. But the doctors locked the door. They feared the stress would kill him. For days, she wandered the platform, peering through the windows, weeping, exiled from the deathbed of the man she had loved for 48 years. Inside the room, Tolstoy was drifting away. In his delirium, he wasn't speaking of books. He was speaking of the search for truth. His last audible words were a question. But the peasants, how do the peasants die? Finally, on November 7, 1910, his breathing stopped. Only then, when he was unconscious, did they let Sophia in. She fell to her knees, kissing his hands, begging for forgiveness he could no longer give. The telegraphs tapped out the message that shook the world. Tolstoy is dead. His funeral was his final act of rebellion. He had demanded no priests, no incense, no prayers. Thousands of people carried his simple wooden coffin in total silence into the Zakaz forest. They brought him to the edge of a ravine. Why there? because of a story from his childhood. When Leo was a little boy, his beloved older brother told him a secret. He said that the secret to universal happiness was written on a little green stick and buried right there by the ravine. The secret that would end all wars, end all suffering, and make all mankind brothers. Tolstoy spent 82 years trying to find that secret, and so he asked to be buried with it. If you go there today, you will see no marble statue, no cross, just a small, grassy mound of earth. It is the resting place of a giant who realized that fame is nothing and love is everything. He never found the green stick, but he left us the map, and perhaps that is enough.